I had no choice. I was born to argue. I went to Jewish elementary school and I argued with my rabbis. I got thrown out of school so often, and my mother was called so frequently that my friends thought my mother worked at the school. My first salary was $7,800. That's about $125, $30, $150 a week, something like that. Wow. I only to become, substantial economically when I started to win all these cases, and suddenly rich people called me.
I'm curious, what is your superpower? What is it that made you so much more competitive than anyone else in your field? I mean, give us a list of the big cases you've worked on.
It's the name of your show. You call it grit, I call it...
Oh, baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is an absolute honor to welcome one of the most brilliant legal minds of our time, Professor Alan Dershowitz. A legendary attorney, constitutional scholar, and prolific author, Professor Dershowitz has been at the forefront of American law for over half a century. As the youngest full professor in Harvard's law school's history, he shaped generations of legal thinkers and has been a towering force of the defense of civil liberties. His courtroom victories are the stuff of legal legend. Having been involved in some of the most high-profile and complex cases in modern history, his impact extends beyond the courtroom. As a fierce advocate for free speech, due process, and the principles enshrined in the Constitution, beyond his legal career, he is a prolific writer and thought leader. With countless bestsellers exploring justice, ethics, and the law, his voice is one of reason and conviction, unafraid to challenge conventional wisdom while staying steadfast in his dedication to the rule of law. Please join me in welcoming a true icon, Professor Alan Dershowitz.
Well, good. Thanks for your kind introduction.
No, my pleasure. You know, this show is about grit. It's about talking to people who have dominated their field, and you certainly have. And so I would love to pick your brain, but before that, I'd like to go all the way to the beginning because I'm really curious. When did you know you wanted to go down this path? Like, how was it for you growing up? Did that impact at all you becoming who you are now?
I had no choice. I was born to argue. I went to Jewish elementary school and I argued with my rabbis. I got thrown out of school so often, and my mother was called so frequently that my friends thought my mother worked at the school because she was there every day responding to phone calls. So I was a belligerent, tough kid. I was also, something of a street fighter. I took my physical strength seriously. I was a competitive basketball player. But a terrible student. I graduated high school 39th out of a class of 47. That means like the bottom fifth of the class.
Wow.
I made it to a public college in New York, Brooklyn College, by taking a test. And then suddenly, within 5 years of being in the bottom of the class, I was at Yale Law School. I was first in my class. I was editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal. I was picked to be a Supreme Court law clerk. And shortly thereafter, I was picked to be a professor at Harvard. So it turned around very, very, very quickly for me. I was always, a wise guy. I was always, I was a smart kid, but smart was used more in a negative way. Don't be smart with me, my mother would say. Don't be funny with me. Don't be funny. Don't start up. Everything she told me was wrong. Startups are good. Fresh food is good. Funny is good. Wise is good. So my parents were embarrassed about me because I was not a good student. And then they became very proud of me. They wished I would remain more religious. Obviously, they were very religious. But I've made my own life. Not surprising, my favorite song is I Did It My Way, obviously by Frank Sinatra. So I did it my way.
That is awesome. So Once you realized that arguing was kind of your thing and that there was a career that was very lucrative in that field, how did that go about? What compelled you to say, you know what, that this legal thing is something where I feel like I can make the most impact given my skills? And then what did you do? Like, what school did you go to initially?
Well, first of all, it wasn't lucrative in the beginning because almost all of my cases were pro bono. I represented people who couldn't afford lawyers. And so I was making even when I went to Harvard, my first salary was $7,800. That's about $125, $30, $150 a week, something like that. Wow. I only to become, substantial economically when I started to win all these cases, and suddenly rich people called me, people like Klaus von Bülow and Michael Milken and Leona Helmsley. And, I charge according to what people can afford. So I charge a lot of money when I represent wealthy people and no money. When I represent poor people, I decided that I wanted to have a joint career. I didn't want to be just a professor. I didn't want to be just a litigator. I didn't want to be just a writer. I didn't want to be just a public intellectual. I wanted to be all of those things. I'm now 86 years old. And as one of my best friends says, I have the energy of an 8-year-old. And I do, that's thanks to my genetic background and the good graces of the good Lord. But I do have a lot of energy. I'm getting older. I feel it. But I can't retire from anything. My wife says to me, all right, you have 4 careers. Give up one of them. I don't know which one. Give up. I don't teach anymore full time. I give lectures and I myself as a teacher, but I've just finished writing my 56th book and I'm on my 57th.
That is incredible.
Until I hit 60. So we're going pretty strong.
That's awesome. So I'm curious, what is your superpower? What is it that made you so much more competitive than anyone else in your field? I mean, give us a list of the big cases you've worked on.
It's the name of your show. You call it grit. I call it chutzpah. And my biggest bestseller was a book entitled Chutzpah. I have, which means grit. I don't take it. As my wife likes to say, I don't get ulcers, I give ulcers. When you attack me, you get it in turn. And so it's a personality thing. And, I was brought up by 2 parents, wonderful people who didn't have college degrees. They didn't have a real formal education, but my father taught me always to fight back and always to defend the underdog. I grew up in the Holocaust. I was born in 1938. If I had been born in Poland, I would have been taken to the gas chambers, at age 4 years old. Many of my family members were taken to the gas chambers. And so I've always fought for human rights, civil rights, but I define civil rights and human rights objectively and neutrally. I'm just as likely to defend Donald Trump as I am Bill Clinton. Right. I don't choose my clients based on their politics. I choose them based on how important and how interesting the case is.
So speaking of that, now that you can look back and everything that you've accomplished, which is incredible, what is the one case where you were the most challenged and why?
Oh, that's easy. It was a man named Anatoly Sharansky. He was a Soviet dissident, a young man, a great chess player, a Jewish refusenik who wanted to go to Israel. His wife had moved to Israel, and he was arrested and charged with spying for the United States and threatened with the death penalty. And I'm not a Soviet lawyer. This was the Soviet Union. The first thing I did is went to see President Carter and got him, for the first time in American history, for a president to say categorically, this man was not a spy. He never worked for the CIA. And that saved his life. And then I worked with another lawyer named Erwin Cutler for 8 years defending him. And ultimately he was released. And that was, one of the most satisfying days of my life. When he got out, he hugged me and he whispered in my ear a Hebrew blessing, Baruch Matir Asurim, blessed are those who free the imprisoned. And that was probably the hardest case of my life and the most gratifying one to win. So at the age of about 40, he got out and moved to Israel, became a member of the government, is one of Israel's most important intellectual and moral leaders. and we're good friends.
That is incredible. And do you see the justice system changing from when you started to now? And if so, is it for the better, for the worse? What is your take on that?
It's interesting. I would hardly say better or worse. When I started, it was secretly corrupt.
Okay.
People didn't know about it, but it was corrupt. You had a much better chance of winning if you had a certain name and came from a certain background than other places. Look, the legal system was corrupt. Again, I mentioned I was first in my class. I couldn't get a job in a Wall Street firm. I was turned down by 32 out of Wall Street firms because I was Jewish, and an impact on practicing law as well. Today, so back in the day, the corruption was understated and underviewed. Today, perhaps it's a little bit overstated. Everybody thinks the system is corrupt. Nobody has faith in our legal system, and both exaggerations were a little off the mark.
Got it. And what is your take on, if you don't mind getting into a little bit of the current events, but like everything that's happening with the Trump administration, with the FBI, them trying to kind of almost like start over from scratch? I mean, that hits right in your field. That's the justice system. So do you think it's a good thing? You think maybe there's some good components, some bad components? What is your take on all of that?
I'm always an on the one hand, on the other hand person, a balanced person. So I think there's a lot that can be done to reform our legal system and depoliticize it. I have no doubt that lawfare exists. I coined that term actually back in the 1960s. I was the first person to use the term lawfare. It's now become a common term. And there's no doubt in my mind that the Justice Department, the New York Attorney General, the New York District Attorney, Fannie Willis in Georgia, all use selective prosecution against Donald Trump. And I'm hoping that Donald Trump and his administration doesn't use it against the Democrats. I made a speech in Mar-a-Lago after Trump became president. Trump came to hear me speak. And I looked at him and I said, please don't sink to the levels the Democrats sunk to. Be objective. And I'm very happy with who he selected for Attorney General. Pam Bondi, I think she will be fair and not political, but I'm going to keep a careful eye out to make sure my criticism is equally balanced on both sides.
That's very interesting. You know, one of the probably most famous cases, well, I mean, there's a bunch of them that you worked on, but one that comes to mind is OJ Simpson. So what is it about that case in particular that maybe most people don't know about? Something that is that if they were in your shoes, they would see it completely different.
They would. What happened was, look, the evidence of his guilt was pretty overwhelming. The question is not the amount of the evidence, but the quality of the evidence. And what happened is the police were sure he was guilty. And they thought that this dream team of lawyers might get him off. So they planted a piece of evidence against them. They took a sock that they found in a hamper near his bed when they went and searched the house. They took the sock home. I can tell you the name of the officer, Officer Van Adder. He laid the sock flat down on a table and he poured OJ Simpson's blood and the blood of the victim on the sock and created a dramatic piece of evidence. But we were able to prove that sock was a fake piece of evidence. How were we able to prove it? First of all, the sock itself had mirror images of the blood on all four sides. That would never happen if the sock were soaked with blood while it was being worn by a human being. It would have mirror images on the first two sides, but not on the third and fourth side. Second, the blood had a chemical in it called EDTA, which is an anticoagulant. It's not found in the human body. It's found in tube. So what happened is Van Adder didn't know that. And he took the blood from the test tube and he poured it on the sock, not knowing that he was creating evidence that would destroy his case because the blood chemical, this telltale chemical. So the jurors at the end, many of them said to themselves, look, what should I do here? I think the guy's guilty. I think there's enough evidence aside from that sock, but do I really want to convict somebody when the government has tried to frame him? What should I do if I believe the government framed a guilty person? And I think reasonable people could disagree as to what a reasonable juror should do under those circumstances.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. You know, as you're describing that, I'm thinking, For entrepreneurs, sales is something that is innate. Like you need to be a good salesperson if you're going to be an entrepreneur because you have to sell your product or service. And it strikes me that as an attorney, you have to do the same because you have to sell to the jury why your case is rock solid, right? So can you tell us a little bit about that, like the salesmanship that goes into it and the psychology behind it?
Well, first of all, the difference between being a salesman for snake oil and a salesman for a guilty defendant is lawyers have ethical rules. We can't say things that others could say. For example, we can't just tell the jury, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I think my client's innocent. You're not allowed to say that. You have to point to evidence, whereas a salesman could say, hey, this product is great. Look, I'll never forget, as a very young boy, I had an experience that really, really shook me. Yeah. There was a city councilor named Philip Shipley, and he was a Democrat. And I had a good voice. I was in the choir, and I was articulate. And so he asked me if I would go around on a sound truck through my neighborhood, and he gave me a prepared speech to make, and I would make the speech. And at one point, and I did it, Shipley is a great city councilor, and he'll do good for this. I could do that. And then at one point he said, and Shipley was accused of taking air conditioners for his house and taking bribes. And I can tell you that, no, that isn't true. And then he invited me to his house, and there were the air conditioners. So I had to quit. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sell a product that I knew was a flawed product. And so I learned from that experience that, a lawyer can be a very good advocate, but he has to have credibility. The jury in the eye and say, I believe this man. And whenever I start a case, I always admit things that hurt my client if I know they're going to be proved anyway. I don't try to prove things that are obviously true. I try to focus on things where I think I can have an impact on the jury. It's a moral tightrope that you always walk when you're more than in many other professions.
And were you always a good communicator? Because you got to be a hell of a communicator to, put your message out there and it land the way you want it to land to get the outcome you want. So has that always been you had naturally?
Yes, I was always a good communicator. I was always, I could always tell good jokes. I was funny. That got me in trouble, obviously, when I took in the classroom. But no, I was always a good communicator. In fact, when I had terrible grades, my mother took me to the New York State vocational whatever and said, what are we going to do with my son here? He's getting terrible grades. And they give me tests. And they concluded that I was a good communicator, so I should be an insurance salesman or an advertising agent or a funeral director. And no, he wants to be a lawyer. And the person said to my mother, you don't understand, Mrs. Dershowitz, to be a lawyer, you have to go to college, and your son is not college material. Well, I finished class in college, so I was college material. But no, I was always a good communicator. I was always articulate, and I was always quick on my feet. You lose some of that when you turn 86, but I hope I've maintained enough of it to be, as somebody said to me, if you're a great pitcher, when you lose your fastball, you pick up an even better curveball. So that I can always have an arsenal of pitches and make sure that I can always, still make my case effectively. And sometimes you do it differently as you get older too. You get more mature. Wisdom replaces cleverness. You adapt.
Absolutely. Well, to wrap up real quick, I'm, curious to get your thoughts on someone that wants to get into the legal field, or maybe just your average guy. What do you say to those guys? What does it take to get to the top of the mountain? I mean, you've gotten to the top and you've stayed at the top, which is another feat in itself. Getting there is one thing, staying there is another. You've done both. So what is some advice you can give to the listeners?
Okay, be a specialist. Do something better than anybody else can do it.
Yeah.
If you're 22 years old today, I'd become an expert in artificial intelligence. I would look at computer issues. I would try to get ahead of the curve. I would try to be able to develop an expertise beyond the law.
Yeah.
When I was young, for me, it was I developed an interest in law and psychiatry, law and medicine, law and mathematics. Almost all the courses I taught were law and something else.
Yeah.
Because I'm interested in the something else as well. So if you want to become a lawyer, be good at something beyond law and beyond just advocacy. And I think that will give you a leg up in the profession.
Couldn't have said it better. Mr. Dershowitz, thank you so much for taking the time. Hopefully this will be one of many times that we can have you here, because there are so many more questions that I have. And my co-host couldn't be here today, but hopefully next time he will be. Again, thank you so much. And we wish you the absolute best.
Keep pushing grit. Grit's important. I call it chutzpah, you call it grit. It's the same thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to watch another episode, or click here to watch a clip from the podcast.
And where down we go.